Parents changed their mind on attending my F18 HS graduation after my church announced their own in 2 weeks, and they want me to attend that instead. I'm writing this because my college plans were completely derailed on Sunday, June 16th. I was about to graduate from high school, and my ceremony was scheduled for later that week. But then, out of nowhere, my church announced they'd be hosting their own graduation ceremony on July 7th. The pastor said it was important to make sure the next generation rooted their future in God, and they'd have us walk down the aisle during the service, be recognized, and receive prayer. They also planned a barbecue afterward to celebrate the graduates. The announcement seemed to come out of the blue, and my parents were suddenly adamant that I not only attend the church graduation but also start going to church regularly again. They even began adding strings to agreements we had made, making demands that hadn't been there before. Before the church made its announcement, my parents and I had agreed on a plan for college. They would help me with tuition for a community college, as long as I found a job this summer. The plan was to eventually transfer to a university to finish my bachelor's degree. Everything seemed set until the church decided to hold its graduation ceremony. Suddenly, my parents announced that they wouldn't attend my high school graduation and, in fact, I wasn't allowed to attend either. This was a complete shock. We had already invited relatives from out of state, but my parents told them to come to the church graduation instead. It felt like they had yanked the rug out from under me. When I told them I still planned to attend my high school graduation with my friends, they threatened to pull their support for my college education and said they'd stop paying if I didn't attend the church ceremony. It was a complete betrayal. I tried to talk to them about how they had suddenly changed their minds, but they wouldn't listen. They told me the pastor had talked about how college could lead people astray, making them lose their faith and morals. They said they didn't want to pay for me to go to college if it meant I would be influenced by worldly ideas. But when I offered to pay for my tuition myself, they came back with another threat. They would start charging me rent beginning in July if I attended the high school graduation instead of the church one. This seemed especially cruel, considering I hadn't found a job yet, despite applying everywhere I could. I've been trying so hard to get interviews lined up, but it's been tough. It's like they're trying to force me back into the church after I made the decision to stop going 2 years ago, and the whole situation has been incredibly frustrating. They claimed they were doing this because they didn't want me to make the same mistakes they did in college, but I feel like they're just trying to control me. There's another part to this story that makes it even more painful. The reason I stopped going to church in the first place was because I was bullied there. 2 years ago, I reached my breaking point during a church youth campout. There was a girl in our group who had been tormenting me for a while, but that night was the worst. She made hurtful comments about my body while we were changing, and the tent chaperone didn't do anything when I complained afterward. It wasn't just that one night. She had been picking on me during youth group for a long time, whenever the leaders weren't looking. That incident was just the final straw. I was so hurt, and I couldn't believe no one stood up for me. Surprisingly, my parents took my side back then. They didn't force me to attend youth group after that, and they even let me stop going to church altogether. I miss the way they were reasonable then, and I wish they could be reasonable again now, but it seems like all of that understanding has disappeared. Now, my relatives, who are all churchgoers, are planning to attend the church graduation instead of my high school ceremony, and I don't know what to do. It all happened so fast, and I feel completely blindsided. My friends are all in high school, and I don't consider anyone in the church's youth group to be my friend, so of course I want to graduate with the people who actually matter to me. But my parents have put me in a situation where I can't attend without facing serious consequences, and it's tearing me apart. I'm also terrified of what my parents might do if I defy them and attend the high school graduation. They know exactly when it is, and I'm scared they'll take my things out of my room and put them outside if they find out I went. I'm afraid I might come back to a locked door. I've even considered reaching out to a friend's parents to see if they could take me in temporarily, and I'm trying to find legal advice in case I need it. But even then, I'm weighing the risk. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, but if attending it means I lose my home and any chance of support for college, I don't know if it's worth it. I'm also worried about who I can trust. I don't want anyone in my family relaying information back to my parents, especially not my older sister, who still attends church and is very close to them. To make matters worse, my parents took my phone away after I reached out to my aunt for help. I had told her everything, hoping she might be able to talk some sense into my parents. She lives on the other side of the country and wasn't planning to come to my high school graduation, but she offered to let me stay with her over the summer if things got worse. My parents didn't like that I involved her and accused me of making family matters public. They threatened to cut off my phone plan unless I handed over my phone and laptop, and I gave in. They also threatened to kick me out right away if I went to my high school graduation, rather than waiting until July. Because of all of this, I decided not to attend my high school graduation. The anxiety about what they might do while I was gone was too much. I knew I wouldn't be able to enjoy it, knowing they could be throwing my things outside while I was at the ceremony. It drained all the excitement out of me, and I lost motivation to do anything else I normally enjoyed, like hanging out with friends or watching TV. I couldn't face the idea of smiling through the ceremony with none of my family there to support me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to hide my emotions. So I went to the church graduation instead, just to get it over with. I rationalized it the same way I had rationalized all the other things I hated about church growing up. I had been forced to go to youth group and kids choir, forced to be baptized, and this was just another obligation I had to endure. It was 5 minutes on stage, a prayer, and that was it. No gifts, no recognition beyond a few words from the pastor. It was easier to stomach than the mandatory pre-baptism classes we had to take, and shorter too. Some of my relatives came and gave me money and cards, and afterward, we went out to lunch. It was the same routine we'd followed when my dad was elected to a church position years ago. The whole thing was just another church event I had to suck up and get through. After the church graduation, my parents gave me my phone back, and the tension in the house lessened. They even withdrew their threat to start charging me rent in July, and things have been peaceful since then. But I'm not fooled. I know they'll find something else to hold over my head in the future, and I'm planning to move out as soon as I can. I'm looking for a job, maybe even 2 if they're part-time, and I hope to stay with my aunt until I can get on my feet. I'll never forgive my parents for what they did. They made me choose between a once-in-a-lifetime event and my own mental health, and I'll never forget how they used their power over me to force me into obedience. But I'm determined to move on and build a life for myself, away from their control. As the days passed after the church graduation, I found myself more determined than ever to break free from my parents' control. The peace in the house felt temporary, like the calm before another storm. Every interaction with them was tense, even if it wasn't overtly hostile. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found another way to manipulate or threaten me. They might have withdrawn their immediate threats, but I could sense that they were just waiting for the next opportunity to assert their dominance. I started to focus all my energy on finding a job. I applied everywhere: retail, food service, office jobs, anything that would give me the financial independence I needed to get out. I didn't care about the pay or the hours, I just needed something to get me started. I spent hours every day searching job boards, filling out applications, and preparing for interviews. Each rejection stung, but I couldn't afford to give up. I knew that staying under my parents' roof would only lead to more stress and more pressure to conform to their religious expectations. In the evenings, I began packing my belongings little by little. I didn't want to make it obvious, so I started with the things they wouldn't notice missing right away: books, clothes I didn't wear often, personal items I could live without for a while. I stored everything in boxes and bags I kept hidden in the back of my closet. It felt surreal, like I was planning an escape from a life that should have been safe and supportive, but instead had become suffocating. My aunt checked in with me regularly, offering encouragement and reminding me that her door was open whenever I was ready. She even sent me some money to help cover expenses once I moved out, which I hid in a separate bank account my parents didn't know about. Her support was a lifeline, and I clung to the idea that soon, I'd be able to live with her and start rebuilding my life on my own terms. The thought of being in a place where I could breathe freely, without the constant fear of my parents' next move, was the only thing that kept me going some days. Eventually, I landed a part-time job at a local grocery store. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay wasn't great, but it was a start. The relief I felt when I got the call was overwhelming. I didn't tell my parents right away. I wanted to save as much money as possible before they found out and possibly tried to sabotage my plans. I began to squirrel away every cent I could, cutting back on anything non-essential. I didn't go out with friends, didn't buy anything unnecessary, and even skipped meals to save more money. It was hard, but every sacrifice brought me closer to the freedom I desperately needed. As the weeks went on, I managed to save up enough to feel secure in my decision to leave. I finally told my aunt that I was ready, and she made arrangements for me to fly out to her place. We set a date for my move, and I kept it secret from my parents until the very last minute. The night before I was scheduled to leave, I sat down with them and told them my plan. I expected an explosion, but they were surprisingly quiet. My mom teared up, and my dad just looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. They didn't try to stop me, which, in a way, hurt even more. It was as if they had already written me off, as if they were relieved to be rid of the burden I had become. The next morning, I left before they woke up. I had packed my bags the night before, taking only what I could carry. The rest of my things, I left behind, items that held memories, but not enough importance to risk staying any longer. My aunt had booked me a flight, and I felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement as I boarded the plane. It was the first step toward a new life, one where I could make my own choices without the constant pressure of my parents' expectations. When I arrived at my aunt's house, I was overwhelmed by the sense of relief that washed over me. Her home was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tension-filled environment I had left behind. She welcomed me with open arms, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. We spent the first few days just talking about everything that had happened, my plans for the future, and the steps I would need to take to achieve my goals. She helped me get settled, and even connected me with some local job opportunities that would allow me to continue saving money and eventually enroll in college. Life with my aunt was different. She gave me the space to figure things out on my own, offering guidance without the overbearing control I had grown so used to. I began to rebuild my confidence, piece by piece, and with each passing day, I felt more like myself. I was still hurt by everything that had happened with my parents, but the distance gave me the clarity I needed to start healing. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I started making new friends and getting involved in the community. It was strange, at first, to be around people who didn't know my past, who saw me for who I was in the present, without the baggage of everything that had happened. But it was also liberating. I could reinvent myself, focus on the future, and leave the pain of the past behind. As the months went by, I continued to work and save money, with the goal of eventually enrolling in college. My aunt was incredibly supportive, helping me navigate the complexities of financial aid and college applications. She even drove me to campus tours, where I could start imagining a future that was mine to create. I knew I still had a lot of healing to do, but with each small step, I felt stronger and more capable of moving forward. The relationship with my parents remained strained. We spoke occasionally, but the conversations were stilted and awkward, filled with unspoken tension. They had made it clear that they disapproved of my choices, but I had come to terms with the fact that I couldn't live my life to please them. I needed to focus on what was best for me, even if that meant distancing myself from them. In time, I began to see that their attempts to control me weren't just about religion or faith. They were about fear. Fear of losing control, fear of seeing me make mistakes, fear of the unknown path I had chosen. But I knew I couldn't let their fears dictate my life. I had to find my own way, make my own decisions, and live with the consequences, good or bad. It wasn't easy, but I was learning to trust myself, to believe that I could handle whatever life threw at me. And with the support of my aunt, my new friends, and the growing sense of independence I was cultivating, I knew I was on the right path. For the first time, I felt like my future was truly mine, and I was ready to embrace it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As the months went by, my life at my aunt's house began to take on a sense of normalcy, something I hadn't experienced in years. The initial euphoria of escaping my parents' control gave way to the daily grind of work and planning for my future. I continued my part-time job at the grocery store, slowly building up my savings while taking on more responsibilities there. My aunt and I developed a routine that felt comforting: dinners together, late-night conversations about everything from our favorite books to her own experiences growing up. It felt like I was finally part of a family that accepted me for who I was, without conditions or strings attached. One day, while at work, I overheard a conversation between two customers about a local art school that offered evening classes. I'd always been passionate about drawing and painting, but it was something I'd pushed to the side during the chaos with my parents. The mention of the school sparked something in me, and I decided to look into it. I spent hours researching the programs they offered, the costs, and the kind of students who attended. It wasn't a traditional college, but it was something that spoke to my heart in a way that community college never had. I brought up the idea with my aunt over dinner, half expecting her to be skeptical. To my surprise, she was incredibly supportive. She encouraged me to follow my passion, even if it wasn't the most conventional path. With her encouragement, I signed up for a weekend workshop to test the waters. The first class was like a revelation. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The other students were all ages, from different backgrounds, and they were there for the same reason as me: to create, to express, and to find something that made them feel whole. I quickly became immersed in the art community. I started attending more classes, staying late to work on my projects, and even volunteering at local art events. I met people who were living their dreams, making a living through their art, and for the first time, I could see a future for myself that didn't involve just surviving. It involved thriving. I began to sell some of my pieces at local markets and online, and the positive feedback I received was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the validation that my work mattered, that I could make something beautiful out of my experiences. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents grew more distant. They called less frequently, and when they did, the conversations were brief and strained. I could sense their disappointment that I hadn't enrolled in a traditional college program, but I was past the point of trying to please them. I still hadn't forgiven them for everything they had put me through, and I wasn't sure I ever would. But I had found a sense of peace in my new life that I wasn't willing to give up for anything. One day, out of the blue, I received a letter from an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to since before the whole graduation debacle. She had heard through the grapevine that I had moved away and was pursuing art, and she wanted to reconnect. We exchanged a few letters, and eventually, she invited me to visit her in the city where she was attending university. It was a few hours away by train, and I decided to take her up on the offer. It was a chance to see an old friend and to get a taste of life outside of the small town where my aunt lived. The visit was eye-opening. My friend was living in a bustling city, full of energy and opportunities. She took me to art galleries, coffee shops, and live music events, places where people my age were living vibrant, creative lives. It was intoxicating, and it made me realize just how much more there was to the world than the narrow confines I had known before. I felt a pull to the city, to the possibilities it held, and I began to wonder if I could make a life there too. When I returned home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something bigger. I talked it over with my aunt, and she could see the change in me. She encouraged me to explore the possibility, to not be afraid of taking risks. With her blessing, I began applying for jobs in the city, hoping to find something that would allow me to move there. It was a daunting process, leaving the safety and comfort of my aunt's home, but I knew I needed to push myself out of my comfort zone if I was going to grow. After weeks of searching, I finally landed a job at a small art gallery in the city. It wasn't a high-paying position, but it was a foot in the door, and it came with the added bonus of being surrounded by art and creativity every day. The gallery owner, a kind but eccentric woman named Margot, took me under her wing, teaching me the ins and outs of the art world. She was tough but fair, and she pushed me to improve my own work while also helping with the day-to-day operations of the gallery. The move was bittersweet. Saying goodbye to my aunt was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but she understood that this was a step I needed to take. She promised to visit often, and I knew she meant it. On the day I left, we hugged tightly, both of us knowing that our bond was unbreakable, no matter the distance. Living in the city was everything I had hoped for and more. I threw myself into my work at the gallery, and in my spare time, I continued to create art. I started participating in local art shows, and to my surprise, my work began to attract attention. I made connections with other artists, attended workshops, and even started teaching a few classes myself. The city became my canvas, and I painted my experiences, my emotions, and my dreams across its streets and in its studios. Over time, I started to gain recognition in the local art scene. My pieces were featured in a couple of exhibitions, and I even sold a few to collectors. It was surreal, and every day felt like a new adventure. The gallery thrived, and Margot eventually offered me a full-time position, with more responsibility and a decent salary. I was finally independent, living a life I had crafted with my own hands. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I received a message from a gallery in New York, one that was much more prestigious than the small one I worked at. They had seen my work in a local exhibition and were interested in featuring it in a show. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch my career to the next level, but it also meant leaving behind everything I had built in the city, including the safety net of Margot and the gallery. I was torn. On one hand, the opportunity was everything I had dreamed of. It was a chance to make a name for myself in one of the most vibrant art scenes in the world. But on the other hand, it meant starting over yet again, in a city where I knew no one, with no guarantees of success. In the end, I took the leap. I accepted the offer from the New York gallery, packed my bags, and moved to the city that never sleeps. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and full of unknowns, but I knew that I had to keep pushing forward, keep challenging myself, and keep chasing the dreams that had started in a small church in my hometown. New York was everything I had imagined and more. The pace was relentless, the competition fierce, but I thrived in it. My work was well received, and the gallery that had invited me quickly became my new home. I met artists from all over the world, learned from them, collaborated with them, and continued to grow as an artist and as a person. Through all of this, my relationship with my parents remained distant. They were aware of my success, but their approval no longer mattered to me. I had found my own path, one that was true to who I was, and that was enough. I kept in touch with my aunt, who remained my biggest supporter, cheering me on from afar as I navigated this new chapter of my life. As the years passed, I built a career that I was proud of. My art continued to evolve, and I found myself in a place I never could have imagined back when I was struggling to choose between high school graduation and a church ceremony. I realized that the struggles, the pain, and the challenges had all been necessary to bring me to where I was. They had shaped me, made me stronger, and given me the courage to pursue my dreams, no matter the cost. In the end, I had made peace with my past. I no longer needed my parents' approval or validation. I had created a life that was mine, filled with passion, creativity, and the freedom to be who I truly was. And as I stood in my New York studio, looking out over the city, I knew that the journey had been worth every moment of doubt, every struggle, and every leap of faith.